A single forgotten invention could have changed everything. What if the Roman Empire discovered steam power? This is not just a story about a clever machine, but a complete reimagining of history itself. By the end of this journey, you will see our entire modern world in a startling new light, as we rebuild a past that never happened. We will explore how steam-driven legions could have marched on forever, and why the very aqueducts of Rome might have pulsed with industrial power. What hidden flaw in the Roman mind left this revolutionary force trapped inside a temple toy? The fate of an empire hangs on a wisp of vapor. What do you believe is the true engine of history? Deep in the library of Alexandria, a metal sphere hissed and spun. This was the ironclad, described by the brilliant engineer Heron. Picture a hollow ball mounted on a pair of pipes, with two bent nozzles pointing outward. Water inside the sphere was boiled over a fire, and the steam would rush out through those nozzles, causing the entire device to whirl rapidly on its axis. By any definition, this was a working steam turbine. It converted heat into rotary motion, the fundamental principle behind the machines that would one day power factories and locomotives. Yet for Heron and the Romans who knew of it, this was not an engine. It was a temple wonder, a philosophical demonstration, or a clever party trick. The reaction was not to harness it for industry, but to marvel at the power of air, or pneuma, as the ancient philosophers called it. The machine proved a concept, but sparked no revolution. This reveals a profound truth about invention. A device alone is not enough. It requires a society ready to see its potential, to ask the right questions of it. The Romans were masterful engineers, but their genius was channeled in specific directions. They built aqueducts that defied gravity, roads that spanned continents, and concrete that could set underwater. Their innovations were monumental, literally. They solved immediate, tangible problems, like bringing water to a city or moving legions quickly. The ironclad solved no such problem. Rome had abundant slave labor, which made the economic drive for labor-saving machinery far less urgent than it would be in 18th century Britain. There was no pressing need to replace the muscle of men with the power of steam. Furthermore, the Roman worldview separated the realms of the philosophical and the practical. Heron's sphere was a fascinating toy for demonstrating natural principles, a curiosity for the educated elite. The idea of connecting this spinning ball to a millstone, a pump, or a loom simply did not compute. It belonged to one world, and the hard work of the empire belonged to another. So the seed of steam power was planted, but in soil that could not nourish it. The ironclad remained a footnote, a spark that failed to catch in the dry tinder of the ancient mindset. What if, against all odds, that spark had found its fuel? What if someone had looked past the wonder and seen the workhorse? The empire's soil was rich with more than just philosophical sparks. Beneath the feet of every citizen lay the true foundation of Roman power, a physical world of staggering scale and sophistication. To understand how steam might have changed everything, we must first see the colossal machine it could have supercharged. Picture the mountains of Hispania, modern-day Spain, where rivers ran red with iron oxide, washed from vast open-pit mines. In Britain, deep shafts chased veins of lead and tin, while the hills of Dacia, present-day Romania, yielded gold so plentiful it famously lowered its value across the Mediterranean. This was not small-scale digging. Roman mining was an industrial operation employing thousands, using complex systems of aqueducts to sluice away hillsides or to power water wheels that drained deep tunnels. They had the hunger for resources and the engineering will to extract them, but they were trapped by the limits of muscle, water, and animal power. deeper seams flooded or collapsed, and the air grew foul. The empire's appetite for metal was literally hitting bedrock. This raw material fed a manufacturing web of astonishing capability. In cities like Pompeii, archaeologists have found fullers' workshops with elaborate milling machinery. Across the empire, water wheels turned, not just for grinding grain, but for sawing marble and crushing ore. The Romans understood mechanical power. They simply sourced it from rivers and streams. Their foundries could cast bronze statues on a monumental scale, and their forges produced the standardized nails, tools, and weapons that equipped a civilization. They had production lines, quality control, and a continent-spanning market. What they lacked was a dense, portable, and controllable source of energy to place anywhere they wanted. Their economy was like a powerful body with a slow, steady heartbeat, limited by how far its blood, the flowing water, could reach. And then there were the roads. Over 50,000 miles of engineered highway, from the rainy highlands of Scotland to the deserts of Syria, all converging on the golden milestone in the Roman Forum. Couriers could travel up to 100 miles a day. Goods moved in wagons, on pack animals, and on the backs of slaves. The Mediterranean itself was a Roman lake, with grain ships from Egypt feeding the million-strong capital. This logistics network was the envy of the world. And yet, land transport had a brutal constraint. Moving heavy goods like marble blocks or large quantities of grain over land was slow and prohibitively expensive, often doubling the cost of goods for every 100 miles traveled. The empire was connected, but not fluid. It moved at the pace of an ox, so this was the stage already set for drama. A globalized economy with massive resource extraction, advanced metalworking, mechanical ingenuity, and a skeletal system of trade routes. It was a pre-industrial giant, powerful but straining against the biological limits of its power sources. It did not need to invent industry from scratch. It needed a new heart, a heart that could beat in the darkness of a mine, drive hammers in a landlocked forge, and pull unimaginable weights along those famous straight roads. The empire was not waiting for an idea. It was waiting for a force, and in that hissing temple toy, that force was already whispering. The hiss of steam needed a problem it could solve, not just a philosopher to admire it. Our turning point arrives not in a library, but in the stifling darkness of a Spanish silver mine in the 2nd century. Here, the relentless demand of the empire met an immovable obstacle. The deeper the miners dug for precious ore, the more groundwater seeped in, threatening to drown the operation and the fortunes it represented. Legion engineers, masters of practical solutions, were tasked with keeping the shafts dry. They already used bucket chains and water screws powered by men or animals, but these were losing the battle against the rising flood. In this damp, desperate crucible, a practical mind might have remembered Heron's spinning sphere. What if, instead of a hollow ball, you built a simple piston inside a cylinder? If steam could push a sphere to spin, could it not push a piston to rise? You could then use that motion to work a pump. This would not be a toy, but a tool for survival. It would be the difference between a profitable mine and an abandoned, waterlogged hole in the ground. This is our plausible spark. The moment steam transitions from wonder to workhorse, it starts as a single, clanking, inefficient machine, a fire tube boiler and a piston, known as an atmospheric engine. It does one thing, lift water, but its success would be undeniable. It saves the mine. Word of such a device would travel along those imperial roads, carried by engineers and merchants. The need was everywhere. In the vast agricultural estates, the latifundia, a plague or a slave revolt could suddenly cripple the labor force needed to grind the season's grain. A landowner facing ruin might commission a local craftsman to adapt the mine pump. Could its motion turn a millstone? Through tinkering and trial, the simple up and down pump stroke is connected to gears and a rotating shaft. Now the fire and steam do not just lift water, they turn stone. They grind flour day and night, independent of tired slaves or a sluggish stream. This gradual adaptation is key. Rome would not leap from the Eolipile to a steam locomotive. It would march step by practical step, from pump to mill to forge hammer, each iteration solving a clear economic or military problem. The 2nd and 3rd centuries were a perfect, tense moment for this. The empire was at its geographical peak, flush with wealth and interconnected like never before. Yet it was beginning to feel the first tremors of future crisis, pressure on borders and strains on the immense system that fed Rome. Necessity, the true mother of invention, was knocking. And in answering that knock, the Romans would have done what they did best. They would have standardized it. Once proven in a mine and a mill, the imperial bureaucracy would see the value. Army workshops would produce standardized boiler designs. Manuals would be written. The engine becomes another piece of imperial infrastructure, like a road or an aqueduct. This sets the stage for something far greater than a few labor-saving devices. It plants the seed of a new kind of power, one that could be deployed anywhere the empire needed it. What happens when you place that power not just in a mine, but at the very frontiers, in the hands of the legions themselves? Deep beneath the sun-baked hills of Hispania, a new rhythm began to pulse. It was not the steady drip of water or the scrape of a pickaxe, but a deep metallic groan followed by a great sigh of steam. In the largest silver mine of the empire, the first true engine had taken its post. Picture a massive wooden beam, like the arm of a sleeping giant, pivoting on a central stone wall. At one end, a chain descended into the flooded darkness of the shaft, connected to a piston inside a great iron cylinder. At the other end, heavy pump rods plunged into a separate well. The process was simple, brutal, and effective. A boiler fed by a constant fire shot steam into the cylinder. Cold water was then sprayed inside, instantly condensing the steam and creating a vacuum. The pressure of the outside air, that very air the Romans called pneuma, slammed the piston down with tremendous force. This yanked the wooden beam, which lifted the pump rods on the opposite side, hauling water up from the depths. Then the cycle repeated: groan, sigh, lift, groan, sigh, lift. This was no temple wonder. It was a beast of burden made of iron and fire, a mechanical heart transplanted into the stone chest of the earth. Soot-covered engineers, more accustomed to maintaining aqueducts, now tended its boiler fires, while teams of slaves redirected its outflow into drainage channels. The effect was immediate and revolutionary. Shafts that had been abandoned to flooding could be reclaimed. Miners could chase veins of ore deeper than ever thought possible, far beyond the reach of simple water screws or bucket chains. The silver yield from such a mine would not just increase, it would skyrocket. Now, imagine this same scene replicated in the gold mines of Dacia and the copper pits of Cyprus. Each clanking beam engine represents a river of precious metal flowing directly into the imperial treasury. This sudden, massive influx of hard currency would have changed the fate of Rome itself. In our history, the later empire faced constant financial crisis, funding its immense armies and bureaucracies by debasing its coinage, mixing less and less silver into each denarius until the currency itself became untrusted, fueling inflation and economic instability. But here, with steam pumps unlocking previously inaccessible wealth, that desperate cycle could have been broken, or at least delayed for centuries. The solid silver denarius could remain just that, solid. The economic foundation of the state, which in our timeline slowly crumbled into dust, might instead have been reinforced with steel and fire. But this new power would not stay underground for long. Once the principle was proven in the empire's deepest holes, ambitious minds would look upward, to the workshops and fields above. If steam could lift water, what else could it move? The rhythmic groan of the pump beam echoed up from the mines, and found a new home in the sprawling workshops lining the Tiber. Here, in the fabrica that supplied the legions with everything from nails to swords, the nature of making things was about to change forever. Steam did not just offer power. It offered consistent, tireless, rotary motion, the kind that could transform a skilled workshop into a roaring proto-factory. Picture the imperial armory first. Massive steam engines, their great flywheels spinning, could drive a bank of enormous leather bellows, forcing a continuous blast of air into a furnace. This was no ordinary forge fire. This superheated blaze could melt iron at temperatures previously unattainable, burning away more impurities and creating larger batches of higher quality steel. From this molten pool, the Empire could draw the material for a new generation of weapons, armor that was both harder and more flexible, and tools that lasted for decades. The clang of the blacksmith's hammer, once a solitary rhythm, could be replaced by the deafening mechanical thunder of a steam-powered trip hammer. This heavy iron head, lifted and dropped by a spinning camshaft, could pound a red-hot billet of steel into the shape of a legionary's breastplate with relentless, perfect blows. The craftsmanship shifts from the sheer strength of the arm to the precision of the machine's setup. Standardization, already a Roman ideal seen in their arrowheads and pottery, would reach a new level. Every helmet forged under that automated hammer could be nearly identical, ensuring a perfect fit and interchangeable parts across the entire army. This principle would ripple out to every workshop. In the bustling port city of Alexandria, renowned for its linen and papyrus, the gentle clatter of hand looms could be drowned out by the synchronized clatter of power looms. A central steam engine, via a labyrinth of shafts and belts, could drive dozens of looms at once, weaving cloth at a pace that would dazzle the ancient world. The production of textiles, the fundamental commodity of ancient trade, would explode. Similarly, in the forested provinces, steam-powered sawmills could transform entire logs into planks, beams, and boards in a fraction of the time, fueling a construction boom from Britannia to Syria. This concentration of machinery creates a new urban landscape. Workers no longer gather in small family shops, but in vast, noisy manufactories centered around the steaming, hissing heart of the engine. A new class begins to form, not of slaves or landed peasants, but of wage-earning mechanics, boiler tenders, and machine minders. Their lives are governed by the shift of the flywheel, not the rise of the sun. The output of the empire would swell, flooding its markets with affordable goods and equipping its legions with unparalleled gear. But this immense productive power creates a new, urgent demand, one that the old roads, built for the pace of oxen, could never hope to satisfy. The very success of the workshop now strains the limits of the empire's veins. How do you move mountains of ore to the forges, and endless stacks of finished goods to the frontiers? The answer would require conquering a new frontier, not of land, but of distance itself. The deafening clatter of the workshops created a new and urgent problem. Mountains of finished swords, stacks of woven cloth, and ingots of fresh minted silver were piling up at the gates, waiting for a way to move that could match the speed of their creation. The legendary Roman roads, engineered for the foot and the hoof, now formed the bottleneck of an empire on the cusp of an industrial age. The solution would not be elegant, but it would be characteristically Roman, brute force applied with relentless engineering logic. The first answer rumbled out of the quarry, not the workshop. Envision a colossal, smoke-belching traction engine, a wheeled iron fortress on the move. These early road locomotives were not sleek machines, but practical monsters. They moved at a walking pace, required a small army of attendants to feed their boilers and manage their temperamental mechanics, and their immense weight would have quickly shattered the delicate paving stones of a via Appia. Their use would have been specialized and monumental, hauling 50-ton blocks of marble from the quarries of Carrara directly to a construction site in Rome, or dragging entire siege towers and prefabricated fortifications with a legion on campaign. The impact on logistics, however, would be profound. A single traction engine could replace hundreds of oxen, and the wagons needed to carry their feed, freeing up immense resources. Supply columns for armies on the German frontier or in the Persian highlands could become shorter, faster, and more reliable, no longer at the mercy of exhausted animals or muddy seasons. Yet the true revolution would not unfold on those ancient, straining roads, but on the water that Rome had always called its own. The Mediterranean Sea, Mare Nostrum, was about to meet its master. The transition from sail to steam at sea was a more natural leap for Roman engineers. They were already master shipwrights, and the principles of paddle wheels were known, used in some water mills. The first practical steamships would likely be humble hybrids, sturdy merchant vessels with a central smokestack and broad paddles mounted on the sides. They would not be fast, but they possessed a magical quality, autonomy from the wind. For the first time in history, a ship's captain could plot a course and hold to it, regardless of the season or the fickle breezes. A grain ship from Alexandria could now make a scheduled run to Ostia in any weather, guaranteeing the bread supply for Rome's restless populace. Military implications were even more staggering. The Roman navy, tasked with suppressing piracy and securing the sea lanes, operated at the mercy of the same winds that favored their prey. A squadron of paddle-driven Liburnians could patrol coastlines incessantly, chase down pirate skiffs with relentless pursuit, and respond to threats with a speed that would seem supernatural. The empire's grip on its far-flung provinces, from Britannia to Egypt, would tighten not with more legions, but with more reliable communication and supply. A message or a cohort of reinforcements could now cross the sea in days, not weeks, making rebellion in a distant province a far more precarious gamble. The Mediterranean would shrink, transforming from a vast and sometimes treacherous barrier into a truly Roman lake, a liquid highway pulsing with the rhythm of steam pistons. This newfound mastery over sea and land did more than move goods and soldiers. It began to compress time and space, pulling the edges of the empire closer to its beating heart. But such profound change never occurs without resistance, and the very fabric of Roman society would soon shudder under the weight of its own creation. Smoke and steam now stained the skies above Mare Nostrum. The familiar silhouette of the Roman war galley, a sleek vessel driven by the synchronized sweat of slaves, was about to become a relic. The first step was not a warship at all, but a pragmatic workhorse. Auxiliary steam transports began to appear, bulky paddle wheelers designed to haul legionaries, siege engines, and supplies. Their value was immediate. A commander could now plan a campaign calendar not around the sailing season, but around strategy. An entire legion could be loaded in Ostia and disembarked on the coast of North Africa or Hispania in a predictable number of days, fresh and ready for battle, not weakened by weeks of rowing or becalmed seas. This alone would have reshaped every military engagement, allowing the empire to project force with a speed and certainty that would seem like magic to their enemies. But the true revolution came when the Navy turned this tool into a weapon. The first dedicated steam warships were likely conversions, but their design would be brutally effective. The classic bronze ram at the prow, designed to smash into an enemy's hull, was now reinforced with wrought iron and mounted on a hull strengthened by internal iron bracing. This created a ram of unprecedented power, capable of shattering traditional wooden hulls with ease. The vulnerable paddle wheels were housed within armored wooden casemates on the sides, protecting them from enemy arrows and boarding attempts. Tactics transformed overnight. A steam-powered quinquereme no longer needed a favorable wind to attack, nor did it exhaust its rowers in approach. It could maneuver in any direction, circling a static enemy fleet, choosing the angle of attack. The classic galley duel of ram, backwater, and board would be replaced by something more mechanical and terrifying. A steam warship could build up tremendous speed in a straight line, drive its iron-reinforced ram clean through an opponent, reverse its paddles to disengage, and then hunt its next target, all while its marines fired volleys of arrows or ballista bolts from stable, unshaking decks. This leads to the logical and perhaps inevitable next step. The ironclad, Roman metallurgy, supercharged by steam-powered forges, could now produce rolled iron plates in quantity. The concept of armoring a ship was not foreign. They had used lead sheathing below the waterline against worms. Applying thick iron plates above the waterline to a stout wooden hull would create a vessel nearly impervious to the weapons of the age. Fire, the great terror of wooden navies, would be useless against it. Enemy rams would splinter on its iron skin. Even the most powerful catapults and ballistae would struggle to penetrate its armor. Imagine such a beast in the conflicts of an earlier timeline against Carthage. Hannibal's brilliant maneuvers on land would mean little if the sea lanes that supplied him were utterly controlled by indestructible Roman leviathans that could bombard coastal cities with impunity, or sink any Punic vessel that dared leave port. In the Empire's own timeline, this naval supremacy would have a profound internal effect. The grain shipments from Egypt, the lifeblood of Rome, were always vulnerable to disruption by rebellion or piracy. A squadron of ironclad guardians stationed at Alexandria would ensure that the bread dole, and thus the stability of the city of Rome itself, was never threatened again. The Mediterranean would not just be a Roman lake, it would become a Roman fortress moat. Yet this absolute dominance at sea creates a new, unsettling reality back on land. An empire that can produce such machines is an empire where the very definition of power, and who wields it, is beginning to fracture. The roar of the foundry and the hiss of the steamship would converge where Rome's power was ultimately decided, on the battlefield itself. A legionary of this new age would step onto the field transformed, not by a change in his courage or training, but by the industrial machine that equipped and sustained him. His armor, the iconic lorica segmentata, would no longer be painstakingly hammered by a single smith. It would be stamped out by a steam-powered drop hammer, each curved plate perfectly identical and interchangeable. If a soldier took a blow that dented his chest plate, the camp blacksmith could simply replace it with another from a standard crate, repaired later at a central workshop. His gladius, the short stabbing sword, would be forged from higher quality, uniformly tempered steel, its edge lasting longer and its point less likely to snap. This standardization meant every soldier in a legion, from Syria to Britain, fought with gear of identical, reliable quality, a quartermaster's dream and an enemy's nightmare. But the true revolution lay not just in what he carried, but in what supported him. The legendary Roman logistics, already the best in the ancient world, would become superhuman. Steam wagons, though slow, could haul immense stockpiles of grain, ammunition, and spare parts directly to frontier forts, ensuring garrisons were perpetually stocked for siege or sortie. More crucially, steam supply ships could keep coastal legions, like those in Britannia or Judea, fed and armed year-round, ending the seasonal constraints of wind-powered supply. A legion could now remain in the field indefinitely, a persistent, grinding force of occupation that never needed to withdraw for want of food or nails. This changes the very nature of frontier warfare. Rebellious tribes in Germania or Caledonia, who traditionally relied on fading a legion's supplies before attacking, would find their strategy useless. The Roman war machine would no longer get hungry or tired. The tools of siegecraft would evolve from dramatic to terrifyingly mechanical. The ballista and onager, torsion-powered catapults, were masters of engineering but sensitive to weather and wear. Now imagine their replacement, a steam catapult. Fed by a mobile boiler, its throwing arm would be winched back not by teams of straining men, but by a steady, powerful steam piston. This allows for a constant, predictable tension. Every shot could be calibrated with mathematical precision, hurling a 90-pound stone or a jar of Greek fire the exact same distance, shot after shot, hour after hour, day and night. Walls would not just be battered, they would be systematically pulverized into dust by an unending, rhythmic hammer blow. For underground work, steam-powered boring machines, essentially massive mechanical drills, could drive tunnels beneath enemy fortifications faster than any counterminers could hope to dig, collapsing walls with terrifying efficiency. Perhaps the most subtle yet profound change would be in communication. The Romans used beacon fires and couriers, but information still moved at the speed of a galloping horse. With steam freeing up manpower and providing reliable power in fixed locations, an ambitious general might implement an enhanced semaphore system. Towers on hilltops, spaced a day's march apart, could be equipped not with simple flags, but with powerful steam-driven shutter mechanisms, allowing complex signals to be transmitted across provinces in hours, not weeks. A rebellion erupting in Gaul could be reported to Rome, and orders for a specific legion to mobilize could be sent back, all within a single day. This collapses the decision-making loop of the empire, making its vast territory suddenly feel much smaller and more tightly controlled. The result is a legion that is more than just well-trained. It is industrially amplified. It arrives fully equipped, is supplied without fail, shatters defenses with machine-like persistence, and operates under a unified command with startling speed. Facing such a force, local rebellions become almost suicidal, and frontier incursions are met not just with disciplined soldiers, but with the inexorable, tireless output of an entire civilization's furnace. This overwhelming advantage could secure the borders for generations, but it also concentrates a terrifying kind of power in the hands of the men who command these legions. When the general has a direct telegraph line to the capital and an army that never runs out of supplies, where does his loyalty truly lie? The relentless rhythm of the forge and the legion would demand a new stage, one built not just for gods and emperors, but for the scale of the machine itself. Roman architecture, already a testament to ambition, was about to be unshackled from the limits of the human back. Construction sites across the empire would transform from scenes of orchestrated labor into theaters of mechanical marvel. At the heart of it all stood the steam crane. This was no simple winch, but a towering iron skeleton, its boiler hissing at the base, its arm pivoting on gears of bronze and iron. With a chorus of shouts from the overseer and the groan of stressed hemp, its cable would tighten. A monolithic column of marble, quarried by steam-powered saws and transported by traction engine, would rise from the earth as if weightless, swinging smoothly into a precisely prepared socket in the floor of a new basilica. Projects that once took a generation could now rise in a decade. The very skyline of Rome would surge upward and outward, with ever grander temples, sprawling bath complexes, and vast, vaulted market halls covering acres. This power would not just build upward, it would conquer the ground itself. For centuries, the Fucine Lake in central Italy had flooded farmland and threatened communities. Emperor Claudius once employed 30,000 men for 11 years in a failed attempt to drain it. Now a battalion of steam-powered bucket dredgers and centrifugal pumps, fed by coal from nearby mines, could tackle the task with systematic fury. They would not just dig a tunnel, they could lower the entire water table, turning a marshy hazard into fertile plains in a fraction of the time. This same principle would allow engineers to build where they never could before. The foundations for a new port city or a frontier capital could be excavated in dry trenches, kept free of seepage by the constant sigh of steam pumps, ensuring stability for millennia. On the wild edges of the empire, this speed translated into sheer, imposing dominance. A project like Hadrian's Wall, a 73-mile barrier of stone and turf, took 6 years of intense labor by 3 legions. With steam-powered cranes to lift the facing stones, mechanical mixers for mortar, and narrow-gauge rail carts pulled by small locomotives moving material along the worksite, the timeline could collapse to a year or 2. The wall would not just be a statement of control, it would be a shocking demonstration of it, appearing across the landscape with unnatural, terrifying speed. But the most profound changes would be in the materials and forms themselves. The same forges producing armor plate could now roll structural iron, I-beams and trusses. Architects, forever pushing the limits of the arch and the dome, would begin to experiment. Iron beams could span wider spaces than any timber, allowing for vast, column-free interiors in basilicas and bathhouses. Early forms of reinforced concrete, with iron rods embedded within, could create thinner, stronger vaults and daring cantilevers. We might see the birth of a new aesthetic, a hybrid of Roman grandeur and raw industrial might. Envision the baths of Caracalla, but with a central hall spanned by a delicate lattice of ironwork supporting a glass roof, flooding the space with light. Picture a temple where the traditional forest of columns is replaced by a few slender iron piers, creating an open, awe-inspiring space that foreshadows the great train sheds and crystal palaces of the 19th century, yet clad in the warm travertine and colored marble of Rome. This new Rome would be a city of staggering, engineered beauty, a physical manifestation of an empire that had harnessed the elements not just for conquest, but for creation. Yet this magnificent new skyline would cast a long and complicated shadow, for the society that built it was being torn apart and rewoven by the very forces that made it possible. But beneath this new skyline of iron and marble, the very fabric of Roman society was being stretched to its breaking point. The steam engine was not just a machine, it was a social earthquake, and its tremors would be felt first in the most brutal foundation of the ancient economy, the slave market. For centuries, the empire's muscle had been human muscle, bought and sold. The mines of Spain, the grain mills of Italy, the oars of the war galleys, all pulsed with the forced labor of millions. Now a single steam pump could drain a mine shaft that once required 1,000 slaves, a task so deadly it was considered a death sentence. A steam mill could grind flour for an entire town without a single tired back. The economic logic of slavery began to crumble. Why feed, house and guard a large, restless population of enslaved workers when a coal-fired engine could do the work more reliably and for less long-term cost? The value of a slave as pure labor would plummet. This would create a crisis of unprecedented scale for the senatorial elite, whose vast wealth and prestige were built on landed estates worked by slave gangs. Their most valuable asset was suddenly becoming a financial burden. Would this lead to a gradual, managed emancipation to avoid revolt? Or would the elite cling to the old ways, sparking waves of desperate violence from a displaced and useless population? In this turmoil, new winners would rapidly emerge. The equestrian class, the wealthy businessmen of Rome, were perfectly positioned to become the empire's first industrialists. They had the capital to invest in engine foundries, to buy mining rights and install pumps, to build fleets of steamships. Their wealth, once tied to trade and tax farming, would now be multiplied by the relentless output of machines. Alongside them, a new social tier would gain immense prestige: the engineers and master mechanics. These were not philosophers or senators, but practical men who understood the language of pressure valves and gear ratios. They would become the indispensable wizards of the new age, commanding high salaries and the respect of emperors who needed their expertise to keep the empire running. Their rise signifies a profound shift, where practical skill begins to rival traditional birthright as a source of status. And what of the common people? The displaced rural slave and the free peasant, whose manual labor was now outmatched, would flood into the burgeoning steam cities, not for the baths or the games, but for work. They would form a new urban proletariat, living in crowded insulae near the roaring factories, their lives governed by the factory whistle's shift. Their labor would be different, tending machines rather than tilling soil, but it would be no less grueling and often dangerous. This new, concentrated mass of workers, free but poor, would become a powerful and unpredictable political force right in the heart of the empire. All of this would challenge the deepest Roman values. The elite ideal was otium, a refined leisure dedicated to philosophy, politics, and cultural pursuits, made possible by the labor of others. How would this class react when the new cult was not contemplation, but relentless industry, when the heroes of the age were not orators or generals, but the soot-stained engineers who kept the boilers lit? The social order was built on clear hierarchies, but the steam engine was a relentless democratizer of power, rewarding innovation and capital over noble lineage. Could the rigid Roman world bend to accommodate this new reality? Or would it shatter under the pressure, leaving the empire's magnificent new machines standing atop the ruins of its oldest traditions? The new sea lanes did more than tighten the empire's grip. They redrew the very map of its economy. For centuries, trade with the distant East was a slow, perilous, and costly relay race. Silk from China, pepper from India, and incense from Arabia moved overland on the Silk Road through a dozen middlemen, each taking their cut, or in small, fragile ships hugging the coast of the Indian Ocean. The Roman steam vessel, with its independence from the wind, changed this calculus entirely. A direct sea route became not just possible, but profitable. Sturdy, paddle-driven freighters, their holds lined with amphorae of wine, glassware, and silver coin, could now strike out across open water from the Red Sea ports of Roman Egypt. They could catch the predictable monsoon winds to India, using their engines to navigate calms and coastal hazards, and return with the opposite monsoon, their timbers groaning under the weight of black pepper, gemstones, cotton, and exotic woods. This direct connection would slash the cost of Eastern luxuries, transforming them from treasures for the ultra-rich into attainable goods for a growing merchant class. The economic sphere of Rome would suddenly stretch from the foggy mists of Britannia to the bustling ports of the Tamil kingdoms. But why stop at India? Ambitious captains and merchants, fueled by tales from Eastern traders, might push further. Could a Roman steamer, carrying extra coal or wood in its hold, follow the Asian coastline to the fabled lands of Sears, the source of silk itself, while a full, regular trade link with Han China might be a bridge too far? The establishment of way stations in Southeast Asia or contact with the intermediary Kushan Empire is plausible. This creates a steam Silk Road, a maritime highway that brings the East into Rome's commercial orbit with unprecedented speed and volume. The influx would be staggering. Warehouses in Ostia and Alexandria would overflow with sacks of pepper, cinnamon, and ginger, making spices a common feature on Roman dining tables, not just a status symbol for senators. This massive increase in available goods, paired with the empire's own booming industrial output, could have a profound stabilizing effect on the Roman economy. In our timeline, the later empire suffered from terrible inflation, partly because it was producing fewer goods while minting more debased coins to pay its bills. Here the equation flips. The empire is producing more of everything, from Spanish iron to Egyptian grain to Indian spices. When the supply of goods rises to meet or exceed the supply of money, prices stabilize or even fall. The solid silver denarius, backed by the relentless output of steam-pumped mines, would buy more, strengthening the currency and the trust people had in it. This economic tsunami required new ways of organizing capital. Building a deep-sea steamship or financing a trade voyage to India was too expensive for any single merchant, even a wealthy equestrian. The natural solution would be the rise of early joint stock companies. Groups of investors would pool their resources, sharing both the monumental risk and the potential for astronomical reward. You can imagine shares being traded in the Forum or on the docks of Puteoli, with scribes recording investments on wax tablets. This practice would begin to concentrate capital not in the old landed aristocracy, but in new, powerful commercial hubs. While Rome remained the political heart, the true economic pulse might shift to the ports, to Alexandria in Egypt, to Carthage in Africa, and to Antioch in Syria. These cities, with their direct access to the steam sea lanes and their bustling factories, would become engines of wealth in their own right, their merchant princes wielding influence that could rival senators. The empire, once a centralized organism fed by its provinces, was evolving into a networked, globalized market, its power flowing along iron rails and steam-driven sea routes. Yet this very network, this web of wealth and information, would present the emperors in Rome with their greatest challenge yet: how to control a world that was suddenly moving faster than any courier could run. A world of moving goods also demands a world of moving ideas. The relentless churn of industry and the new wealth it created would generate an insatiable hunger for something far more valuable than silk or silver: information. The steam engine, a machine of iron and fire, would become the unlikely midwife to a revolution of the mind. In the great libraries of Alexandria and Pergamum, scholars had long copied texts by hand, a slow and expensive process that kept knowledge locked in the hands of the elite. But in the steam-powered foundries that now stamped out identical armor plates, the principle of standardization found its perfect intellectual counterpart: the printing press. With the ability to cast and machine precise, reusable metal type on an industrial scale, the words of Virgil, the engineering diagrams of Vitruvius, and the latest imperial edicts could be reproduced not by the hundreds, but by the thousand. Picture the scriptorium transforming into a bustling print shop, the rhythmic clack of the press joining the city's industrial hum, each pull of the lever stamping out another page of Plato's Republic, or a manual on aqueduct maintenance. This cascade of cheap, available texts would do more than just preserve old knowledge. It would democratize it, Literacy, once a mark of aristocratic leisure or bureaucratic necessity, could begin to spread among the burgeoning middle class of merchants, engineers, and skilled artisans. A shopkeeper in Austria might afford a printed copy of Livy's history. A legionary engineer on the Rhine could consult a standardized manual on siegecraft, and a provincial landowner could study the latest agricultural techniques from a manual produced in Rome. The very concept of education would shift, moving from an oral tradition centered on a teacher to one where knowledge could be acquired privately, from a book. This creates a feedback loop of innovation, as more people with access to foundational texts can build upon ideas, propose corrections, and share discoveries. But the press needed something to print on. Here, too, steam provided the muscle. Traditional papyrus was fragile and limited to Egypt, while parchment from animal skins was prohibitively expensive for mass production. Steam-powered mills, however, could mechanically pound rags into pulp for paper, a technology known to the Chinese and potentially reachable via the new maritime trade routes. This strong, cheap, and plentiful material would be the perfect partner to the metal type, creating the physical medium for an information explosion. Now combine the press, the paper, and the new speed of steam-powered ships. A scientific treatise written in Alexandria could be typeset, printed, and loaded onto a paddle steamer bound for Rome within a week. From there, copies could travel up the coast to Gaul, across the sea to Carthage, and through the new canal at Corinth to the Aegean. Ideas no longer traveled at the speed of a sailing season or a courier's endurance. They could circulate around the Mediterranean in a matter of months. This creates the potential for a truly unified imperial culture, where a citizen in Londinium reads the same poetry, studies the same legal principles, and learns of the same technological advances as a citizen in Antioch. More importantly, it accelerates collaboration. An engineer in Spain solving a problem with mine ventilation could publish his findings, and an engineer facing a similar issue in Dacia could read that solution and improve upon it a year later, creating a cumulative, empire-wide progression of technical knowledge. The isolated genius of a Heron, whose Earlipal died with him as a curiosity, becomes a relic of the past. In this new world, every invention, every observation, every philosophical argument is captured, multiplied, and set adrift on a sea of steam and paper, waiting to find the mind that will connect it to the next great leap. But what happens when this torrent of new knowledge and new power begins to challenge the deepest, most sacred stories Rome tells about itself? Smoke now clung to the marble columns of the Forum, a greasy, grey veil that stung the eyes and left a gritty taste on the tongue. This was the breath of the new age, and it carried a bitter cost. The gleaming steam engines and towering cranes ran on an insatiable appetite for fuel. First, the forests of Italy fell, then those of Gaul and North Africa, cleared at a terrifying pace to feed the boilers. When wood grew scarce and expensive, the empire's engineers turned their relentless machines upon the earth itself, opening deep coal mines where men, women, and children labored in perpetual darkness, their lives measured in tons of black rock hauled to the surface. The air in Rome, once famed for its clarity, grew thick and acrid, a permanent twilight settling over the grandeur of the Palatine Hill. Inside the roaring manufactories, another kind of darkness took hold. The work was no longer governed by the sun or the seasons, but by the ceaseless rhythm of the drive shaft. Shifts lasted 12, 14, even 16 hours, amidst deafening noise and unbearable heat. Workers, many of them former peasants or displaced slaves with no other choice, tended machines that could snatch a limb in an instant, or boilers that might explode without warning. Children small enough to crawl inside machinery for repairs were a common, tragic sight. While chattel slavery might have declined, this new form of wage slavery created its own miseries, a life of grinding poverty, dangerous labor, and the relentless pressure of the factory whistle. For many, the mechanical heart of the empire beat with a cruel, indifferent rhythm. This terrifying new power did not just transform the homeland, it supercharged the empire's hunger for conquest. With steamships that could ignore currents and seasons, nowhere was beyond reach. Ambitious generals and greedy merchants now looked past the traditional frontiers, their eyes gleaming with possibility. Why merely defend the Rhine when you could send ironclads up its tributaries and subjugate the forests of Germania Magna? Why tolerate the nomadic raids from the steppes when steam-powered logistics could support permanent legions deep in Scythia, building fortified cities to secure endless plains of wheat? The most dramatic leaps would be across the water. A fleet of troop transports could carry 3 full legions to the misty shores of Scandinavia, not for a raid, but for permanent occupation, driven by the need for the region's rich iron ore and vast timber reserves. Another armada might steam down the coast of Africa, establishing fortified ports and pushing inland along river systems, seeking gold, ivory, and new lands for plantation agriculture worked by conquered peoples. This acceleration created a technological chasm between Rome and the rest of the world that was both unbridgeable and horrifying. To the tribes of Caledonia, or the kingdoms of the Sahara, the arriving Romans would have seemed less like soldiers and more like demons. Their ships moved without sails, their machines felled forests in days, and their weapons struck with inhuman power. This wasn't just a military advantage, it was a form of existential terror that could crush resistance before it even formed. The empire's expansion would become less about strategic annexation and more about systematic extraction, turning entire continents into appendages to feed the endless appetite of the imperial machine. The very concept of barbarian would shift from a cultural distinction to a measure of technological inferiority, justifying exploitation on a scale the ancient world had never conceived. The light of progress, it seemed, cast the darkest shadows, and the empire's new strength was built on foundations of soot, sweat, and suffering. Could such a system, for all its glory, ever truly be sustained, or was it destined to consume itself from within? Every hissing boiler and spinning flywheel represented a new kind of authority, one that the imperial throne would be desperate to command. In a world transformed by steam, the most valuable commodity was no longer gold or grain, but control over the machines themselves. The Roman state, with its deep instinct for order and hierarchy, would inevitably move to harness this disruptive force. The likely result would be the creation of a powerful new bureaucracy, perhaps called the cursus vaporis, the steam course. This would not be a mere office, but an empire-wide department reporting directly to the emperor, staffed by engineers loyal to the crown. Its mandate would be absolute, to regulate the construction, sale, and operation of every engine above a certain size. Private citizens might own small mill engines, but the powerful beam engines for mining, the massive marine boilers for warships, and the intricate mechanisms for the imperial mints would all be manufactured in state-controlled fabrica, their designs guarded as military secrets. The empire would not just use steam, it would seek to own the very idea of it. This technological grip would extend its fingers into the realm of information, creating tools for surveillance and command that would make previous emperors envious. Building on the known principles of hydraulic telegraphs and semaphore systems, the cursus vaporis could establish a network of steam-powered signal towers along every major road and coastline. These would not be simple flags, but robust, clockwork-assisted shutter mechanisms, their movements precisely controlled by small, automated steam engines to ensure consistent, rapid signaling regardless of weather. A complex code could transmit detailed messages from Rome to the Rhine frontier or the Syrian desert in a matter of hours, not weeks. For the first time, an emperor could receive a report of unrest in Britannia at breakfast, and have his specific orders for the local governor transmitted back before sunset. This collapses the vastness of the empire, allowing the center to react to crises with frightening speed, and to micromanage provincial affairs to an unprecedented degree. Provincial governors, once semi-independent rulers of their domains, would become mere administrators, their every significant decision subject to instant review from the Palatine Hill. Yet, this very system designed to centralize power could also become its greatest vulnerability. The technology it sought to monopolize was inherently dispersible. A skilled mechanic could build a boiler in a hidden valley, and the coal to feed it was dug from the earth in 100 distant places. On the volatile frontiers, ambitious generals commanding legions would have a powerful incentive to develop their own local steam industries. A governor of Germania, tasked with defending a long border, would argue he needed his own engine works to repair wagons and produce armor without waiting months for shipments from Italy. Once established, such a frontier industrial base would be a source of immense power. That general could build his own steam transports, arm his own troops with the best standardized weapons, and even construct fortified foundries deep in secure territory. With a self-sufficient war machine and the wealth from local resources, his loyalty to a distant emperor would become a matter of choice, not necessity. The empire could thus fracture not along old tribal lines, but along new industrial ones, with rival power centers in Antioch, Carthage, or Londinium emerging not as cultural alternatives, but as competing steam-age states, each with the industrial might to field its own armies and navies. The emperor's new tools promised absolute control, but they also handed the means of rebellion to anyone with the knowledge to wield them. The permanent twilight over Rome would be tested by a storm of unprecedented fury. The crisis of the 3rd century, a 50-year nightmare of barbarian invasion, civil war, and devastating plague, shattered the empire we know. But would our steam-powered Rome have shattered with it? The advantages it could bring to this existential fight are profound. When the Germanic Confederation of the Alemanni smashed through the Rhine frontier, the news would flash along the steam telegraph to Rome not in weeks, but in hours. The emperor could immediately order legions from the quiet Danube, or even from Britain, to embark on steam transports. These reinforcements, moving at a steady 6 knots regardless of river current or coastal wind, could plug the breach in the limes with a speed that would baffle the invaders, who expected months of plundering before a Roman response could be organized. This rapid strategic mobility could turn a frontier collapse into a series of contained, manageable battles. The deadliest blow of the crisis was the plague of Cyprian, a pandemic that swept through cities, killing millions and crippling the agricultural workforce. Here, steam-powered industry offers a grim but effective buffer. While the plague ravaged the population, the automated flour mills, powered by coal and not by sick or dead slaves, would continue to grind. Steam-powered pumps could maintain irrigation in vital farmlands like the Nile Delta, even as field laborers fell ill. More importantly, the empire's enhanced logistics network could become a lifeline. Steam wagons and ships, operated by small, isolated crews, could deliver stockpiled grain from secure provinces directly into quarantined cities, preventing the mass starvation that often followed pestilence. The empire's mechanical heart could keep beating even as its human body was fevered and weak. Yet for all these strengths, the steam-age empire would face terrifying new vulnerabilities. Its legions and its cities now depended on a complex web of machinery, that required constant, expert maintenance. What happens when a skilled mechanic, one of a precious few who understands a legion's mobile field boiler, succumbs to the same plague? A broken-down steam transport column in a war-torn province could strand an entire army without supplies far more completely than a traditional ox cart convoy ever could. The very concentration of industry that made Rome wealthy also made it a colossal target. A rebel general or a besieging enemy army would know that capturing or destroying the central engine works of a city like Milan or Antioch would cripple an entire region's ability to produce weapons, repair ships, and mint coins. Warfare shifts from defeating armies in the field to strategically blinding the enemy's industrial nervous system. So, would this augmented empire have survived the crisis and emerged as an unshakable, eternal power? The likely answer is a fraught and transformative survival. The external barbarian invasions might be repelled with shocking efficiency, their raids met by ironclads on the rivers and legions arriving by rail cart along the frontier roads. But the internal rot, the civil wars between rival emperors, would be fought with far deadlier tools. A battle for the throne would no longer be a contest of legionary loyalty alone, but a race to seize the key industrial hubs, the coalfields of Britain, the armories of the Rhine, the shipyards of Carthage. The empire might not fragment into 3 separate empires as it did in our timeline, but it could fracture into competing industrial zones, each with its own general turned technocrat, ruling from a fortified factory city. The ultimate legacy of steam during the crisis might not be preservation of the old empire, but the brutal birth of a new political order. To manage the complexity and vulnerability of the machine state, the emperor who finally reunified the empire would be forced to create something unprecedented: a technocratic dictatorship. Power would flow not to the senatorial aristocrat, but to the master of the curses, vaporis, the director of the imperial telegraph, the general who controlled the coal supply. The Senate's halls might stand empty, while the real business of empire was conducted in the map rooms of the signal corps and the design offices of the artillery works. The empire would survive, but at the cost of its soul, becoming a cold, efficient, and terrifyingly resilient machine state, governed by the logic of the boiler pressure gauge and the logistical timetable. Its collapse, if it ever came, would not be a slow fading, but a single catastrophic systems failure. A world going dark all at once. A new pantheon of gods would be needed for this new world of fire and iron. In the face of such incomprehensible power, the ancient Roman religious instinct would seek to personify it, to find a divine hand guiding the piston's stroke. The obvious candidate for patronage would be Vulcan, the limping god of the forge and fire. No longer a minor deity associated with volcanic rumblings, he would ascend to become a central figure of the state cult. His temples, traditionally smoky workshops, would transform into awe-inspiring cathedrals of industry. Worshippers might not just leave small metal trinkets, but marvel at grand, steam-powered automata, mechanical bulls that snorted vapor or statues of the god himself that rhythmically hammered an anvil, all driven by hidden boilers. These would not be seen as mere machines, but as moving idols, proof of the god's active presence and favor. Prayer would shift from simple supplication to a form of technical negotiation. Engineers would make offerings before lighting a new boiler's fire, seeking Vulcan's blessing for a safe and efficient burn. The very language of faith would absorb the lexicon of the engine. A pious man might speak of the divine pneuma, the sacred breath that now drove industry as well as life. The philosophical schools would scramble to explain this new force. Stoics, who believed in a rational, orderly universe, might see the steam engine as the ultimate expression of divine logos, reason made manifest in iron. a tool for humanity to fulfill its role within nature's grand design. Epicureans, who sought freedom from fear and pain, might champion the engine as a liberator from brutal toil, a mechanical path to the tranquil life they prized. Yet for all this adaptation, a deep anxiety would thrum beneath the rituals. The Romans believed in the pax deorum, the peace of the gods, maintained through correct practice. What if the relentless mining, the felling of sacred groves for fuel, and the arrogance of reshaping the world with fire constituted a profound offense? Every boiler explosion or mine collapse could be interpreted not as an accident, but as divine wrath, a warning that humanity was overreaching. This spiritual tension would find its most explosive expression in the growing faith of Christianity. To the early Christians, this technological leap would present a profound dilemma. One faction, perhaps aligned with educated converts, could embrace it as a gift from God, a tool to alleviate suffering and improve the human condition. They might cite Genesis, where humanity is given dominion over the earth, and see in the steam engine a means to fulfill that mandate, to drain malarial swamps, to produce abundant food, to build shelters for the poor. This could become a powerful evangelizing tool, demonstrating the tangible benefits of a new, compassionate God. Yet a stronger, more visceral reaction would likely be one of horror and condemnation. The Church Fathers would look upon the satanic mills and the soot-choked cities and see not progress, but a new Babylon. The dehumanizing factories, where men were cogs in a machine, would be denounced as an affront to the divine image in every person. The pride of engineers, playing God with the very elements, would be condemned as a repeat of the Tower of Babel, a hubristic attempt to seize powers belonging to the divine alone. Sermons would thunder against the fire idols of Vulcan and the moral corrosion of endless industrial wealth. In this clash, Christianity could position itself not as a relic, but as the conscience of the age, the protector of the human spirit against the cold logic of the machine. This theological ferment would ultimately force a choice. Would Rome's soul be forged in the same fire as its steel, embracing a new, mechanistic spirituality? Or would it fracture, with the old gods presiding over the engines, and a new God championing the people who fed them? The answer would determine more than faith. It would decide what it meant to be human in an age of artificial power. Centuries of industrial thunder finally meet their ultimate test in the 5th century. By the year 476, our timeline witnessed the unthinkable, the last Roman emperor in the West, deposed by a Germanic warlord. But in a world where legions marched to the rhythm of steam pistons, could that fate have been avoided? The answer is not a simple yes or no, but a clash between the empire's newfound strength and its potentially fatal new weaknesses. On one side of the scale, the advantages are staggering. A steam-augmented empire would have entered its final crisis with a population fundamentally more resilient. Reliable grain shipments from Egypt and Africa, powered by steam, could have mitigated famines that historically weakened the populace before invasions. Public health, while grim in the factory cities, might have seen some improvement with steam-powered aqueducts, ensuring a cleaner, more consistent water supply to urban centers, and with the capacity to quickly drain malarial swamps that plagued regions like Italy. This means a larger, healthier pool of citizens for the army and the tax rolls. The military itself would be a force of unimaginable potency against the migratory tribes. The Visigoths or Vandals, arriving at the Danube or Rhine, would not face a thinly stretched line of fortifications manned by weary troops. They would confront an integrated defensive network. Steam telegraphs would have alerted command centers the moment a large group assembled, allowing generals to direct reinforcements via river steamer or narrow-gauge military railway with precision. The tribe's greatest advantage, their mobility, would be neutralized by Roman logistics that moved faster and carried more. A barbarian army that bypassed a frontier fort would find its path blocked by rapidly deployed legions arriving on steam wagons, their soldiers clad in standardized plate and supported by mobile field artillery. Conquest would become a logistical nightmare for any invader. Yet the very technology that created this formidable defense may have sown the seeds of a deeper, more insidious collapse. The relentless pull of industry depopulated the countryside. Small farms, the traditional backbone of the Roman state, and the recruitment ground for its best soldiers, were abandoned as people fled to the factory cities for wage labor. This created a critical vulnerability. The empire's agricultural base became centralized, fragile, and dependent on long, complex supply chains. If a Subai warband managed to sever a key rail line or a rebel fleet interdicted the grain convoys from Africa, entire regions could face starvation almost overnight. The empire's strength was now concentrated in its industrial nodes, making them colossal targets. Furthermore, the social cohesion needed to weather a crisis may have evaporated. The traditional bonds of patron and client, of citizen and state, were replaced by the impersonal relationship of worker and factory owner. A populace living in crowded, soot-choked slums, working dangerous jobs for meager pay, might feel little loyalty to a distant emperor in Ravenna. When the tribes came, would these urban masses fight for the empire that exploited them? Or would they see little difference between one master and another? This internal rot suggests the fall might not come from a single dramatic invasion, but from a gradual systemic failure, where the empire becomes a hollow mechanized shell that finally shatters under pressure. Perhaps the most plausible outcome is not the salvation of a unified Rome, but a dramatic reconfiguration of its death. The East-West divide would not just be political, but technological. The Eastern Empire, centered on the ancient, wealthy lands of Anatolia, Syria, and Egypt, had the dense populations, the advanced urban centers, and the access to Eastern trade routes to become an industrial superstate. Constantinople could evolve into a steam-powered fortress city, unmatched in the world. Its walls guarded by automated artillery, its fleets of ironclads controlling the Black Sea and the Aegean. The West, with its longer frontiers, sparser population, and greater distance from the Eastern coal and trade, might have struggled to maintain the same level of industrial intensity. It could have devolved into a patchwork of militarized, semi-independent regions, each centered on a key industrial hub like Carthage, Milan, or Londinium, fighting a slow, grinding battle of attrition against the migrating tribes. In this scenario, the fall of the West is not averted, but transformed. Rome's legacy in the West might not be ruins and roads, but the scattered independent machine shop kingdoms rising from its ashes, while in the East, a Byzantine empire, supercharged by steam, endures for 1,000 years as an unassailable technological colossus, altering the very axis of world power forever. The clatter of the Western machine shop kingdoms fades into a different sound across the sea, the deep, resonant hum of a civilization that did not break. While the West fragmented, the Eastern Roman Empire, what we call Byzantium, would have absorbed the shock of the age, not as a collapse, but as a catalyst. In Constantinople, the new Rome, the legacy of steam found its perfect home. Here, the ancient engineering genius of the Greeks met the relentless practicality of Roman administration, all focused on a single, magnificent, and defensible city. The famous chain that could be raised to block the Golden Horn from enemy fleets would no longer be hauled by the straining muscles of men, but by the smooth, immense power of a steam winch housed in a fortified tower. The city's countless grain mills, vital for feeding its 500,000 citizens, would be driven not by unpredictable water or animal power, but by the steady fire of coal-fed boilers, ensuring bread even during a siege. The legendary Theodosian walls, already the most formidable fortifications in the world, would become an active, intelligent barrier. Steam-powered elevators could rush defenders to any threatened sector, while automated, engine-driven counterweight trebuchets precise, relentless, and capable of hurling projectiles day and night, would make any direct assault a mathematical impossibility. Constantinople would transform from an impregnable city into an unassailable fortress machine. This secure industrial base would grant the Byzantine Empire something its historical counterpart desperately lacked: a stable and overflowing treasury. The wealth generated by automated workshops producing silk, arms, and luxury goods, combined with control of the steam-powered trade routes to the east, would fill the imperial coffers beyond the dreams of avarice. With such resources, the dream of restoring the lost western provinces moves from nostalgic fantasy to serious policy. A reconquest would not resemble the slow campaigns of antiquity. Imagine a new Byzantine fleet, not of galleys, but of armored paddle-wheelers, each a floating fortress. They would not sail, but steam in formation, independent of the wind, appearing off the coast of Italy or North Africa with terrifying speed. They would carry not just soldiers, but prefabricated siege engines and standardized equipment from the factories of Anatolia. A campaign to reclaim Rome itself would be less a war and more a systematic reclamation, overwhelming the patchwork Germanic kingdoms with logistical and technological force they could not comprehend. The Mediterranean would once again become a Roman lake, but this time its master sat in the sublime port of Constantinople. This steam-augmented Byzantium would face its greatest historical test in the 7th century with calm, terrifying efficiency. The explosive rise of the Arab Caliphate, which in our history stripped the empire of its richest provinces in Syria, Egypt, and North Africa, would meet a fundamentally different opponent. The desert armies, masters of swift, mobile warfare, would find their strategies useless against an empire that could move faster. Byzantine ironclad dromons, sheathed in rolled iron plate, would control the coastal waters completely, making amphibious support for Arab campaigns impossible. But the true nightmare for any attacker would be the evolution of Byzantium's most fearsome weapon, Greek fire. Historically, this mysterious, sticky incendiary liquid was sprayed from siphons on ships. Now picture it pressurized by steam pumps, allowing it to be projected in a continuous, roaring jet over distances previously unthinkable, or launched in exploding shells from steam-powered mortars. The walls of cities like Damascus or Alexandria, if they were ever besieged, would be ringed with fire. The Arab conquests, which relied on momentum and capturing intact infrastructure, would shatter against this mechanized defense. The historical border that solidified in the mountains of Anatolia might instead be pushed deep into the deserts of Syria, permanently altering the religious and cultural map of the world. The long-term consequences ripple outward across centuries. A Byzantine empire that never lost its heartland provinces remains the undisputed superpower of the medieval world. The Crusades, as we know them, simply do not happen. There is no desperate appeal from a weakened emperor for Western knights to reclaim the Holy Land, because the Holy Land never fell. Pilgrims might travel east on Byzantine steamships, but the violent clash of cultures that defined the medieval period is muted. The flow of knowledge is also redirected. The great libraries and universities of Constantinople, powered by steam-driven printing presses, become the sole beacon of classical and technical learning. The Renaissance does not emerge in Italian city-states, rediscovering lost Greek texts, because those texts were never lost. They are continuously studied, improved upon, and printed in Constantinople, sparking a permanent, gradual scientific revolution centered in the East. This changes the very trajectory of global exploration, warfare, and thought. Finally, consider the Ottoman rise. The Turks, who historically chipped away at a weakened Byzantium for centuries, would face an entity of a different order. They could not slowly strangle a city reliant on hinterlands, because this Byzantium is a networked industrial state. The final siege of 1453 would be unthinkable. Mehmed II's massive cannons might pound the Theodosian walls, only to see steam cranes swiftly repairing the damage by night, while automated counter-battery fire pinpointed his gun emplacements from within the city. The great Ottoman armies would be held at bay not just by walls, but by an entire civilization's technological momentum. The empire that fell in our timeline might, in this one, watch from behind its shimmering wall of Greek fire as the world changed around it, a millennia-old colossus of steam and stone, forever altering the question of where power resides. A world without the fall of Rome is a world without the Dark Ages as we know them. The traditional timeline, where Europe fragments into isolated feudal kingdoms and classical knowledge, is lost or preserved only in scattered monasteries, simply does not apply. In its place stands a continuous, unbroken line of Greco-Roman civilization, now supercharged by 1,000 years of industrial evolution. The intellectual and technological stagnation that defined the early medieval period in our history is replaced by a permanent, accelerating renaissance. Think of the great minds of our 15th century, figures like Leonardo da Vinci. In this timeline, a thinker of his brilliance would not be a lone genius rediscovering ancient texts, but a professional engineer working within a vast, state-funded imperial academy, building upon a millennium of cumulative technical literature printed on steam-powered presses. The concepts of perspective, anatomy, and mechanics he pioneered might be standard curriculum in Alexandria or Constantinople by the year 800. This continuous progress reshapes the very rhythm of discovery, turning revolutionary leaps into steady, incremental steps forward. This relentless forward motion would inevitably turn the empire's gaze outward, to oceans previously seen as impassable barriers. With fleets of deep-hulled, coal-fired steam vessels capable of ignoring the doldrums and prevailing winds, the age of exploration arrives not in the 1500s, but perhaps in the 900s or 1000s. Roman captains, equipped with refined astrolabes and maps drawn from a global trade network, would no longer need to hug coastlines. They could strike out across open water with a confidence unknown to later European sailors. The first sighting of the New World might not be by Norse longships venturing to Vinland, but by a Roman naval expedition charting the Atlantic currents from a base in Britannia, or a merchant fleet blown off course while seeking a direct route to the Spice Islands. Upon finding these new continents, the encounter would be utterly different. The Romans would arrive not as a handful of adventurers, but as the advanced spearhead of a global industrial state. Their steam-powered ships would seem like dragons from myth, their standardized steel tools and textiles like treasures from the gods. While colonization and conflict would still be tragic inevitabilities, the technological and biological gulf would be so vast that the shape of the Americas would be irrevocably altered within a generation, integrated into a Roman global system centuries before Columbus ever set sail. This enduring superpower would also act as a voracious sponge for innovation from other cultures. In our timeline, technologies like the magnetic compass from China, advanced algebra from the Islamic world, or formulas for gunpowder traveled slowly along fractured trade routes, often taking centuries to be adopted in Europe. In this world, a unified, inquisitive, and technically sophisticated empire straddling 3 continents, would absorb these discoveries with lightning speed. A Chinese clockwork mechanism or a Persian water-raising device brought by traders to Antioch would be immediately studied, reverse-engineered, and improved upon in imperial workshops. Gunpowder, rather than remaining a curiosity or a ceremonial tool, would be analyzed by Byzantine chemists and military engineers, leading to the rapid development of standardized firearms and artillery decades, or even centuries earlier than in our history. This constant aggressive synthesis of global knowledge would create a feedback loop of innovation, keeping the empire perpetually at the cutting edge and making the very idea of it falling behind technologically almost unthinkable. The most profound consequence, however, is philosophical. Our entire conception of history is built upon a sequence of epochs, ancient, medieval, and modern, defined by the collapse of Rome and the long, slow climb back. That framework dissolves. Without a great collapse, there is no great recovery. There is no medieval period, because there is no descent into a dark age to define it. The transition from ancient to modern would be so seamless, so gradual, that historians of this world would not even have the words for it. They would likely see their history as a single, glorious arc of continuous civilization, punctuated by periods of faster or slower growth, but never by a true break. The Roman Empire would not be a subject of archaeology, but the living, breathing context of the present. This changes everything about how a society sees itself, its potential, and its place in time. The past is not a lost world to be rediscovered, but the foundation upon which every new invention is built. The future, therefore, is not a mystery, but the next logical page in a story that has been writing itself for 2,000 years. And on that page, the empire would eventually encounter the only force capable of rivaling its own industrial might, not a foreign army, but the internal combustion of its own revolutionary ideas. The relentless pursuit of a more efficient boiler would become humanity's first formal physics laboratory. In our world, the scientific revolution required the rediscovery of classical texts and a new philosophical framework. In a steam-driven empire, its seeds would be planted not by philosophers in libraries, but by engineers in soot-stained workshops, driven by the most practical of questions: how do we get more work from less coal? This empirical hunt for efficiency could ignite a systematic study of nature a full millennium before the age of Newton. By the 4th or 5th century, the brightest minds in the empire would not be solely debating Plato in Athens, but measuring cylinder pressures in Antioch or testing piston seals in Carthage. The very language of inquiry would shift from abstract speculation to precise measurement. Terms like force, pressure, and work would cease to be philosophical concepts and become quantifiable properties, tracked in ledgers next to coal consumption and output. This daily, grinding need to improve the machine would force a new kind of thinking, one that married relentless experimentation with a search for underlying principles. The first great leap would likely be in thermodynamics, though they would not call it that. Engineers running a mine pump would meticulously record how much water they lifted for each load of wood or basket of coal burned. They would notice patterns, that a sealed cylinder performed better than a leaky one, that superheated steam delivered more force. Through decades of this painstaking, practical tinkering, fundamental truths about heat, energy, and waste would begin to crystallize into rules of thumb, then into formalized theories. A brilliant figure, a Roman counterpart to James Watt, would inevitably emerge from this environment, perhaps a military engineer tasked with making siege engines more portable, or a freedman overseeing a vast imperial fabrica. His breakthrough might not be a separate condenser, but an improved valve gear for better timing, or the recognition that a double-acting cylinder where steam pushes the piston both ways could double the power from the same fire. His fame would spread not through philosophical treatises, but through imperial edicts, adopting his design for all state-owned engines, his name becoming synonymous with power and progress. This hands-on revolution would radiate out into every material science. To contain higher pressures, you need stronger metals. This drives a furious cycle of advancement in metallurgy. Furnace masters, collaborating with the engineers, would experiment endlessly with iron alloys, carbon content, and tempering techniques, not through alchemical mystery, but through controlled tests, producing graded samples of steel with documented properties. The quest for smoother motion and less friction would advance the science of mechanics, leading to precise studies of gears, bearings, and lubrication. The concept of mechanical advantage, understood intuitively by Archimedes, would be calculated and tabulated for every machine in the empire. Over centuries, this culture of measurement and experimentation could lead to the early formulation of laws we associate with much later eras. The conservation of energy might be glimpsed, not as a grand universal law, but as the principle of the fire and the flywheel, the observable truth that the work output of an engine can never exceed the heat potential of the fuel consumed. Laws of motion, describing the relationship between force, mass, and acceleration, could be deduced from the precise workings of steam catapults and the recoil of piston assemblies. The natural world would cease to be a realm of capricious gods and become a vast, intricate engine whose rules could be decoded, measured, and harnessed. This represents the most profound divergence of all. A world where the scientific method is born not from a rebellion against dogma, but as the logical extension of daily industrial practice. By the time our timeline reached the Crusades, this alternate Rome might have a quantitative understanding of the physical world that would not be matched in Europe until the 18th century. But with such profound knowledge comes a new kind of power and a new kind of peril. What happens when a society that understands the laws of nature turns that understanding toward the most fundamental force of life itself? Marble columns now rose before skeletons of iron. The steam age demanded a new aesthetic, and Roman culture, always a voracious adapter, began to produce it. In the grand public squares, poets no longer recited only of heroic battles and pastoral idyls. They now composed odes to the machine. A poet laureate might craft verses praising the anima feria, the iron soul, of a great beam engine, comparing its piston stroke to the heartbeat of Jupiter himself. Yet alongside this official celebration, a counter-movement bloomed. In smoky taverns, other poets echoed the older, melancholy strains of a Virgil, mourning the silenced groves and the soot that dimmed the stars, writing elegies for a lost world of clear streams and simple farm life. This tension between glorious progress and profound loss became the central drama of the age, reflected in every art form. The satirists had a field day. A figure like Juvenal, scathing critic of Roman vice, would find endless material in the new industrial elite. His verses would skewer the novus homo vaporis, the new man of steam, a former brickmaker who now dines on peacock tongues while his workers cough in tenements. The satire would lampoon his crude attempts at culture, his gaudy villa lit by flickering gas lamps, and his clumsy Latin peppered with engineering jargon. Theatre, too, would adapt. The comedies of Plautus might feature scheming slaves not trying to win their freedom, but to steal the design for an improved valve gear, while the stock character of the braggart soldier could be replaced by the boastful factory foreman, exaggerating the output of his boiler room. Art and entertainment became a mirror, both celebrating and critiquing the engine of change. This cultural shift was carved in stone and cast in iron. Architecture ceased to be purely decorative and became a statement of capability. The traditional temple facade of columns and pediment remained, but now it was often a mask. Behind that marble skin, the true structure was a web of wrought iron beams, allowing interiors of breathtaking scale. A new basilica might have a vaulted ceiling, seemingly suspended in air, its weight borne by slender iron pillars disguised as fluted marble columns. Public baths incorporated vast glass ceilings, made possible by iron framing, where bathers could lounge under a soot-hazed sky. Even in private homes, the wealthy displayed their modernity with decorative touches, door handles shaped like flywheels, mosaic floors depicting intricate gear assemblies, and frescoes showing Vulcan presiding over a tidy, idealized factory floor. The message was clear: the old forms remained, but they were now powered by a new, invisible strength. This redefinition extended to the very core of Roman identity, its philosophy. The old schools of thought grappled with the machine. Stoicism, with its focus on enduring hardship and finding virtue within a rational universe, found a natural ally in the disciplined, predictable world of the engine. The ideal Stoic sage might now be imagined as the unflappable engineer, maintaining his apatheia, his calm detachment, even as boiler pressure climbs, methodically following the rational steps to safety. But a more radical school could well have emerged from the workshops, a kind of proto-transhumanism. Its thinkers would argue that human virtus, excellence, was no longer limited to the body or the mind alone. True excellence now lay in synthesis, in the fusion of human will with mechanical augmentation. They might dream of tools that could strengthen the arm, lenses that could sharpen the eye, or calculating engines that could extend the reach of reason itself. The Roman ideal of discipline, would be transferred from the drilling legionary to the meticulous mechanic, whose perfect timing and maintenance kept the great machine of civilization running. In this worldview, humanity was not diminished by the tool, but elevated, reaching for a godlike mastery over nature that would have made even Prometheus pause. The ultimate cultural product of the steam age, therefore, was a new vision of what it meant to be Roman, and indeed what it meant to be human. The philosopher's dream of mechanical wings would find its form not in myth, but in metal and canvas. After a millennium of refining boilers and pistons, the empire's mastery over pressure and lightweight alloys would inevitably turn its gaze skyward. The first practical applications would be military, as always. Envision a scouting aerocursus, a steam-powered dirigible. Its envelope is not rubber, but a durable linen treated with lacquers, holding in the heated air or hydrogen produced by chemical works. A compact, high-pressure engine drives a pusher propeller at the rear, allowing it to maneuver against the wind. From a basket slung beneath, legionary observers could map enemy fortifications in real time, their reports sent down via weighted message tubes or simple flag signals, rendering the fog of war a distant memory. For civilian use, larger and slower passenger versions might connect the Empire's greatest cities, floating serenely above the traffic-choked roads, a luxurious and breathtaking mode of travel for the elite. Alongside these, the ancient fascination with bird flight, studied by Daedalus and Archimedes, would yield mechanical ornithopters. These would be smaller, muscle-powered or spring-driven contraptions for daring individuals, perhaps used for ceremonial displays or by imperial couriers for the most urgent of dispatches across difficult terrain. The sky, once the sole domain of gods and birds, becomes a new layer of Roman infrastructure. This conquest of the air would force a deeper, more profound questioning of the heavens themselves. The same relentless engineering mindset that asked how to build a better pump would eventually ask what lies beyond the air. The study of ballistics, perfected for steam catapults, would lead to precise understandings of trajectory, velocity, and resistance. Engineers testing increasingly powerful, compressed air cannons would note that projectiles fired straight up never returned from the same point, beginning to map the complexities of wind currents and atmospheric drag. A brilliant mind in the Alexandrian Academy, experimenting with chambers and valves, might even construct a primitive pressure vessel, demonstrating that as you remove air, things behave strangely, feathers and lead pellets falling at the same rate. This simple device points toward a vacuum, a concept that would shatter the Aristotelian belief that nature abhors empty space and open the door to a true science of gases and pressure. All of this feeds directly into astronomy, which transforms from an art of observation into a precise science of prediction. The empire's need for perfect calendrics for agriculture, navigation, and religious festivals drives the demand for accuracy. Steam power provides the solution not in propulsion, but in precision timekeeping. Imagine the great observatory at Alexandria housing a masterpiece, the Sphera Machina. This is a planetarium powered by a slow, constant steam engine. Its intricate clockwork of bronze gears and rods modeling the motions of the planets, the Moon, and the Sun with a fidelity never before possible. Powered by a regulated boiler, its movements are constant, allowing astronomers to predict eclipses decades in advance and refine their models of the cosmos with empirical, mechanical data. This device makes the universe appear not as a chaotic realm of divine whim, but as a vast, comprehensible machine, operating on principles that might one day be understood, and perhaps even mastered. So, by the time our history reaches the year 1500, this alternate Rome would stand at a threshold we did not approach until the 19th century. Its scholars possess a detailed, mechanical model of the solar system. Its engineers have conquered the sky with lighter-than-air craft and dream of controlled, heavier-than-air flight. Its physicists grasp the fundamentals of pressure and vacuum. While the chemical energy needed for true rocketry remains centuries away, the intellectual path is clear. The question is no longer what the heavens are, but how they work, and whether humanity might someday reach them. The ultimate speculation is not that Romans would have launched a satellite by the Renaissance, but that they would have firmly established the dream of doing so as a legitimate, scientific pursuit, turning the gaze of a 1,000-year empire from the roads of earth to the starry roads above. The dream of an ancient industrial age is a captivating one, but history chose a different path for a reason. After exploring the staggering possibilities, we must confront the sobering realities that kept that steam-powered sphere a temple toy. The first and perhaps most formidable barrier was economic. The Roman economy was fundamentally built on a foundation of human muscle, specifically slave labor. The empire had access to a vast, replenishable supply of enslaved people through conquest, making manual labor cheap and abundant. For a Roman senator or wealthy equestrian investing in an estate or a mine, the calculus was simple. Why spend a fortune developing, building, and maintaining a complex, temperamental steam engine when you could purchase another 100 slaves? The initial capital cost of machinery was prohibitively high, and the perceived return on investment was minimal when human labor was so readily available and disposable. There was no burning economic incentive to replace men with machines, no urgent drive for efficiency that would later fuel the factories of Manchester. The engine solved a problem Rome did not feel it had. Even if the economic will had existed, the technological means were not fully there. Heron's Eolipile was a brilliant demonstration, but scaling it up to a practical, powerful workhorse engine required precision that ancient workshops could not achieve. The heart of a useful steam engine is a tightly fitted piston, moving within a smooth cylinder. Any significant leak between the piston and the cylinder wall would allow steam pressure to escape, rendering the machine pathetically weak. Creating that perfect seal demanded metallurgy and machining tools like precision lathes and boring mills. That simply did not exist in the ancient world. Roman metalworkers were masters of casting statues and forging swords, but machining a perfectly round, smooth iron cylinder to exact tolerances was beyond their capability. They lacked the hardened steel cutting tools and the mechanical aids that emerged more than 1,000 years later. Without these, a working engine would have been so inefficient and leaky that it would have confirmed the skepticism of any practical-minded engineer, seeming more trouble than it was worth. Then there is the simple question of fuel. An industrial revolution runs on cheap, abundant, and concentrated energy. In 18th century Britain, that fuel was coal, mined from seams close to the surface and later from deep pits. While the Romans were aware of coal and used it sporadically in Britain and Gaul, especially for smithing, it was never a ubiquitous primary fuel. Their economy was powered by wood and charcoal. To feed a network of steam engines would have required deforestation on a catastrophic scale around every industrial center. Long before the engines could produce the tools needed to mine coal efficiently at depth. This creates a paralyzing chicken and egg problem. You need steam pumps to mine coal deeply and affordably, but you need abundant coal to run the steam pumps. Without a pre-existing, easily accessible coal economy, the fuel logistics for a widespread industrial takeoff may have been insurmountable. Perhaps the deepest obstacle, however, was not in the workshop or the mine, but in the Roman mind. The ancient worldview, for all its brilliance, lacked the systematic, cumulative approach to harnessing nature that defines modern science. Greek and Roman natural philosophy was often about understanding the world's order and beauty, not about relentlessly bending it to human will for economic gain. Heron himself represented this divide. He was a genius inventor, but his works include temple miracles, automatic theater, and ingenious toys. The Eolipile was categorized as a wonder, a demonstration of pneumatic principles. The intellectual leap from seeing steam spin a ball to seeing it as a universal prime mover for industry requires a specific framework, one that seeks to break down natural phenomena into measurable, controllable components for the explicit purpose of production. This mindset, marrying empirical experiment with a drive for continuous economic growth, simply wasn't the dominant paradigm. Knowledge was often secretive, tied to individual crafts or military needs, not widely shared and built upon through publication and peer refinement in a relentless push forward. So the Roman Empire possessed a spark, but not the tinder, the bellows, or the furnace to create a self-sustaining fire. The why not makes the what if all the more poignant and powerful. It underscores that history is not just about inventions, but about contexts, about the intricate web of economics, technology, resources, and ideas that must align for a revolution to ignite. The real marvel, then, may not be that Rome failed to industrialize, but that 2,000 years later, a different society finally did, connecting all those missing pieces. This realization brings us to the final, most reflective question of all. What does this grand thought experiment ultimately tell us about the nature of progress itself? So we are left with the echo of a lost future, a ghostly empire of steam and iron that never was. This journey through a world of clanking legions and soot-stained skies is more than just a flight of fancy. It is a mirror held up to our own reality. It reminds us that history is not a straight, inevitable line from past to present, but a vast, branching tree of possibilities. At every moment, the path taken is just one of many that could have been, shaped by a fragile weave of technology, economics, culture, and sheer chance. The Romans built a monumental civilization with the tools and the mindset they possessed, and their legacy in our world, their laws, their language, their roads is profound enough without the addition of steam. Yet, by asking what if, we do more than rewrite the past. We sharpen our understanding of how civilizations truly work. We see that a single invention, like Heron's spinning sphere, is inert without a society hungry to use it, without an economy that demands it, and without a culture that can envision its potential. The real story is not about the machine, but about the world it must be born into. This thought experiment, for all its grandeur, carries a quiet warning for us today. We live inside our own technological civilization, one we often assume is permanent and inevitable. But history shows us that progress is not guaranteed. It is a delicate balance, a complex system that can stall or even collapse if the right conditions are not met. Our own world runs on a web of inventions and resources far more intricate than anything the Romans dreamed of. It begs a reflective question. What seemingly small discovery or overlooked idea in our own time could be the Irlipile of the 21st century? What tool do we treat as a curiosity or a toy that a future society might look back on and say, if only they had understood what they held? The value of exploring these alternate pasts is that they make us more thoughtful observers of our own present. They encourage us to look at the foundations of our world not as solid rock, but as a dynamic, ever-changing construction. They fill us with a sense of wonder not just for what happened, but for all that almost did, and for all that still might. The past is fixed, but our understanding of it is forever fluid, and in that fluidity lies endless fascination. We would love to hear your thoughts. What other pivotal moments in Roman history do you think could have changed everything with just one different decision or discovery? Share your own what-if scenarios in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this journey into history's greatest mysteries, be sure to subscribe. There are always more roads to explore, more echoes from the past waiting to be heard.